and welcome to Today We Craft. Today we're going to be talking all about cutting mats. My big new cutting table is one of the best features of my new craft room. I was looking for a worktop protector that could also work as a cutting surface. The problem I'd had previously was this is the size of cutting mats I always used to have. Now, as you can tell, even having two next to each other with large pieces of fabric, it was very easy to accidentally go off the edge. I didn't want to wreck my table having only just built it, so I knew that I wanted a cutting mat to cover the whole thing. Rhino actually have several options available for different cutting surfaces, which we're going to go through today. Rhino have been good enough to send me some large samples of their various different products. You can order these yourself by going onto their website. I'll leave a link in the description below. As you can see, I had already decided what sort of mat I wanted, but depending on the type of crafter you are, you might need a different product. For me, the most important features would be for it to be made to measure and also be a really high quality cutting surface. You, on the other hand, may be a painter or a paper cutter, so your requirements for your cutting surface might be slightly different. You might want it to have better stain resistance or better for intricate cutting, for example. These are some of the things we're going to test out today. Let's start off by going through some of their most popular products. Let's start off with a heavy duty cutting mat. This is suitable for large applications or situations where it's going to get a lot of use. It's 4.5mm thick and semi-opaque. It has good self-healing properties and is silicone free, which means that your cutting blades are going to last that much longer. It's also solvent proof and has a textured anti-glare surface. Similar to this is the Create mat. This is lighter weight and lighter duty, being only 3mm thick, but has all the same hard wearing qualities as the heavy duty mat. The other advantage of this mat is that because it's thinner, you can see the grid pattern through it that much easier. Also available are the Supaseal and the Supalite mats. The Supaseal is a 5mm double-sided mat that has excellent self-healing properties, making it ideal for medium to heavy-duty cutting applications. The Supalite is similar, but being only 3mm thick. The final product we're going to talk about are the green mats. These are what we would recognise as a standard cutting mat and are available A4 to A0 size, or 1.8 metres by 90 centimetres. On the green side, the measurements come in inches, and on the grey side, in centimetres. This is a 5-layer self-healing cutting mat specifically designed for crafting purposes. The first test we're going to do is see how easy it is to see the grid pattern underneath each mat. As you can see, the Supaseal and Supalite mats are ideal for being able to see the grid pattern. However, it's important not to disregard the Create or the heavy duty mats, as it's still possible to see the grid pattern through these mats. Of course, you can't see the vinyl mat through the green mat, but that doesn't really matter because it's printed on top. Our next test is going to see how each mat withstands different cutting tools. So here I have my paper rotary cutter, a scalpel and my fabric rotary cutter. And I've got different materials that we're going to be cutting on each of the mats and see how they do. Let's start with the green mat. We're going to test it with paper, card and a heavy duty cotton. After initially taking off the three materials, I can't see any obvious damage at all. The only thing I can feel is where the rotary cutter came around this corner, it just gouged out ever so slightly. But even just running my nail over it, I can barely feel it anymore now. So that has really good both fabric and paper cutting properties. Next, we're going to test the heavy duty mat. And I'm going to do exactly the same process as I did before. Now, interestingly, with the paper, I can already tell it's got a slightly more resistant to the cutting. So I think it's because it has a textured surface, you might be able to see rough edge there. It hasn't made an entirely smooth cut. Let's see how it does with the cardboard. Again, I can almost feel like it kind of, it's a weird thing to describe, it's almost crunches as it goes round. It cuts perfectly fine, and it's much better on the card than it was on the paper. Now we'll try with the fabric. Now on this one I can't actually tell a difference between using the green cutting mat and this one. Oh, it wasn't pressing quite hard enough. There, so it cuts through quite nicely. It is a clean cut. So now let's see how it's performed. Now I can see the marks in it. It's not so much of a slice, it looks like a scratch. I'm not sure if you can really see necessarily on there. Maybe if it's put at a slight angle. I mean, from a distance you can't see anything at all when it's actually on the table there, but when you look it up close, you can see a bit of a mark, so it's not as good at healing as the green cutting mat, but certainly very hard wearing, and it cuts very well with the fabric. Now going to do the same process with the Create mat. Again, I can feel the kind of crunchiness as I had with the heavy duty mat. Although interestingly it's a much cleaner cut, which I wouldn't have expected. I'd assumed it would have been exactly the same as the heavy duty mat. And yeah, you can see it's a fairly rough cut on there on the paper. Try with the cardboard. Yeah, that's a nice clean cut, cuts really nicely with the cardboard there. That's quite clean. So it's with the finer paper, this one seems to make a difference. Yeah, nice and fine on the cardboard there too. Yeah, it cuts really nicely. Really nicely on that surface. Again, let's see how it's withstood it. Again, I can see like a very, if you tip it into the light, you can see a faint scratch, but nothing major. So yeah, very happy with that one. Now let's move on to the Supaseal mat. So this one is much softer. You can feel in terms of the flexibility of the material. It's a much softer plastic. So we'll try with the paper first. And this is very smooth cutting. If you push too hard, I don't know if you can quite see there, but when the material pushes in, the paper does move ever so slightly. But maybe that's just because I'm cutting harder than I necessarily need to. It is in fact you get a really nice cut with even barely any pressure, and that cuts a really nice smooth edge. Let's test it with the scalpel. Yeah, it's just a really nice, soft, smooth cutting surface to work on. Ah, now that's interesting. I'm not sure if you can really tell that, but because it's so soft, it won't actually go through the fabric at all. It's more that the fabric just goes into the mat rather than it actually cutting at all. So this is the sort of mat that's going to be good if you're cutting paper or cards, but it's no good for fabric. Let's just see how it's withstood it. I mean, again, from down there you can't see anything, and actually I can't feel anything. On the heavy duty mat, I can feel a slight mark there. On this one, I can feel nothing at all, which is interesting. Again, if you hold it up to the light, in fact, you can see the marks in this one better than you can on the heavy duty mat, and I think it's because it's clear. But in terms of self-healing properties, it's perfect. There's no evidence, touch-wise, that a cut was ever made on that surface. So that's really good. I expect it's probably going to be the same story with the Supalite. Yeah, beautifully nice surface to cut on there. Really quite satisfying, actually. Is that weird? It's just a really, really nice, and also just because of the nature of the surface, it feels grippier on here than it is on here. So it it holds the paper quite nicely. So I bet you could do quite intricate paper cutting. I mean, I'm not going to try because I'm not a paper cutter, but I bet you could do really intricate paper cutting on this mat particularly well. And again, I've got a feeling I know what's going to happen, but let's test it anyway. Yeah. Nothing at all. So yeah, going back to, if you were a paper cutter or cutting cards, these mats are really, really nice, but no good fabric, as it turns out. So the final test that we're going to do on these is stain resistance. And I have a bit of a confession here. This is actually the second time that I've filmed this section, because I filmed it before and my camera didn't record audio, helpfully. So this is actually the second time that we're doing this little experiment. So what I've got is an ink pad, standard ink pad. If you are a card maker or doing much sort of paper craft, chances are you're going to be using ink. So you're going to want a mat that's going to be really stain resistant. So let's start off by, I mean, there's not a huge amount of ink on this pad, it's a bit dried out, but I hope it's got enough to give you a cause for comparison anyway. So what we're just going to do is we're going to put a load of ink onto our mat. And we're going to let it dry and then see how easy it is to clean it off. Okay, so we've left our mats for a few minutes and now the ink is completely dry. And so what we're going to do is I've got a cloth here and I'm just going to rub it over and see how easy they are to clean up. And it looks like they're pretty easy. I mean, what you can notice quite quickly is on the mats where they have a slightly less good self-healing quality, is the ink comes off the mat itself really easily, but you can just about see where it's sort of the ink is getting trapped in the cracks. Whereas you look at that in comparison to the Supaseal and the Supalite mats, and even over where the cuts were previously, because they've healed up so well, there's nowhere for the ink to hide. It's a bit streaky, but to be honest, I think that's more down to the cloth being dirty than the mat itself. So again, if you're going to be doing a lot of ink-based or paint-based crafts as opposed to fabric cutting, then you might find that the Supaseal and the Supalite are going to be more appropriate for you. I very nearly forgot to do the same experiment with the green mat, which wouldn't have been very intelligent, so let's do that one as well. And as you can see, again, the cloth is a bit grubby now, but I hope you can see that there is no staining on there whatsoever. Okay, so let's just have a very quick recap on all the mat options and which one might be most appropriate for you. So firstly, the heavy duty mat and the craft mat. Pros: very hard wearing, comes custom sized to your requirements, very easy to cut fabric. Cons: doesn't seem to cut lightweight papers particularly well. I mean, it cuts it, but it gives it a bit of a rough edge. Also, you can't see the vinyl mat as well behind them. I mean, you can use the vinyl mat behind both the heavy duty and the craft mats perfectly fine. And that's what I've done on my table. I have the vinyl mat and the Create board on top of it, and it works fantastically well. But just, they're not going to be as easy to see as the Supalites. So Supaseal and Supalite. Pros: can see right through them. Fantastic self-healing qualities and really easy to keep clean. Cons: can't use them to cut fabric. You'd need to have a green mat or something as well on top of it. And finally, the green mat. Pros: fantastic self-healing. Can cut any material on it. Easy to keep clean. The ink didn't stick to it at all. The only con, as far as I can tell, is that you can't get them as big as the other mat options. So if you have a table my size, you can't have a mat like this that fits it. Like I said, it only goes up to 1800 by 900 mil. But if your table is that size, brilliant. I'd probably go for that one. I wanted a mat that could cover my entire surface area that I could still use for other crafting purposes as well. And so that's why I went for the vinyl grid with the Create mat on top of that. And I couldn't be happier with it. It was really, it was fantastically easy to install. The delivery was really fast, and I'm going to get many, many years out of this table now, knowing that I can cut absolutely anywhere on it and it's going to keep the work surface protected.